Welcome back, friend. Today I have another great guest joining us on the Balance Badass podcast. I am so excited for this conversation. Courtney has been helping women worldwide just take better care of themselves with more consistency and ease for the past 20 years. So she's got some experience under her belt, which is awesome. She helps women mend their relationship with themselves so that they can achieve deep health and live with more power, purpose, and impact. And I love that so much. That aligns with a lot of the work that I do, and a lot of what I share with you as the listener. So she's also hostess of the highly rated podcast Grace and Grit. So I'm really excited to have another podcast host here and author of the recently launched The Consistency Code. So she's here today to share with us her insights on health and consistency. And as you all know, I talk about how restoring your baseline well-being is kind of your first line of defense in burnout recovery. So I know this is going to be a good one. Welcome to the show, Courtney.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, very excited to have you. So, we are going to kick off. I always kick off all of my guest episodes with this question, and that is, what's something that you're loving in your life right now?
I think there's a lot of things. Like, I am a lover of life. I would definitely say that. So there's a lot of things. But I was sharing with you before we hit record that I do have a new puppy. And she is, there's something about like a child's energy or puppy energy where, yes, it's wild and chaotic and messy and so frustrating at times. And it's also really inspiring and goofy. And it just brings a lightheartedness to your life sometimes that you didn't realize you were missing. And that's where we're at right now. We are just totally deep in the throes of puppy land.
I love that. I love that so much. As I'm sitting here with my senior dog snoring in the
I love the
background.
stores. Yes.
So, yeah. But we also, as I was sharing with you earlier, we also have a fairly, I call him, he's in his teenager,
Oh, yeah.
preteen ages, stage of life where he's just the annoying little brother. And that's our dog, just so in case anyone gets confused. But yeah, so I totally get the energy and the fun, the exhaustion, but also the, fun times that it causes. And to be able to have that youthful energy around is really nice for us too.
Yeah. And I think it's such a good reminder, too, of like the double side of everything, right? Because so much of what is so rewarding and fulfilling in life is also really hard. Marriage, kids, careers, like there's always this pull that brings you into it. And then there's that irritation and frustration and obstacles and all the things that show up within it because that's just the way it rolls.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Such a good point. Wow, way to start off the episode, I'll tell you. No, that's great. So, Courtney, for anyone who's just meeting you, so you're a health coach, you're a podcaster, you're an author, but your approach is really different from what most people think of as wellness based on just me reading the book and kind of just understanding what you do. So, how do you describe what you actually do to like a complete stranger?
Yeah. So it's interesting, right? Because I know culture at large loves titles. We love tiny little boxes we can shove things in so we can understand things better. And so with my title, that's always been really challenging because I've been a lot of things. I've been the personal trainer, I've been a nutrition coach, I've been a fat loss coach, I've been a life coach. And I just arrived in this place in my career where I kind of feel like I defy labels. I think most people do. But the best way I can probably make sense of it with a title would be a health and self-leadership coach, because I do believe that health is an exercise in learning how to lead yourself powerfully. It is not an exercise in following. But man, is that what we've been sold, right? That someone always knows better than we do, that we just need to outsource all of our decision making around health and well-being. And I think that really just leads us to a place of self-abandonment. It just leads us to this place where we feel like we're doing all the right things, but there's also this deep dissatisfaction or internal friction, which I call integrity pain. So at the end of the day, the problem I solve for my clients is helping them to get out of integrity pain. And integrity pain is really, it's that very real discomfort that shows up when your behaviors are very misaligned with what you actually want for your life. So you say you want to be healthy, but you're staying up until 1 o'clock in the morning watching Netflix. You say that you want, this dream career, but you are never working on your resume or putting out feelers or networking. And so we have a lot of hiding habits in our life. We have a lot of things that are pulling us away from what we actually want. And the work that I do now is really helping my clients get to the root of that, because I'm a huge believer that at the end of the day, health is really about stress management. And if you don't learn how to offload things that are unnecessarily stressing you, but also lean into certain stressors on purpose, you're probably never going to be a very healthy or happy human.
Yeah. Wow. And you know what you were talking about with that integrity pain, that's a lot of conversations that I have with folks about like the choices that you're making
Sure.
sometimes are fueling, specifically my lens with burnout. They may not be the sole source or driver of where your burnout's coming from, because typically there's some workplace conditions or culture that are
Mhm.
tying into that, but you're making choices that may not be helping that situation. And we have very similar conversation of like, what do you want,
Uh-huh.
and are your choices in alignment with kind of that identity? Are you making choices that are in alignment with somebody who has a more balanced approach to work? Whether you believe in work-life balance is a different story, but like, do you have a more balanced approach?
Yeah.
Are you someone, you say you want boundaries, but are you actually setting those boundaries? Like those kind of things. And I love this concept too of like the hidden habits that are contributing to a lot of this. And it's so much of this has to do with your health. And,
Yeah. And I
we
love
see
how
this.
Yeah, sorry, I
Oh, go
didn't mean to
ahead.
interrupt. Yeah. I was just going to say I love how you started the interview too, just talking about that base level health, right? Or that
Hmm.
base level foundation that if you don't have it, it makes the real work of your life so incredibly hard. And to me that's what health is. It's not really the point of our life. Like some people just get so obsessive about their health and it like takes up all their time and energy. I am not that person. I don't want my clients to be those people. I want their health to serve the greater purpose they're here to contribute to, whatever that is. And so I always say health just gets you to base camp. It doesn't actually get you to the summit of your life, right? That's other work, but it really helps you get to base camp and get acclimated so you have the resources and the resilience to make that climb.
Yeah. Yeah. We're so aligned on that because I'm always like, this is like the foundation of what you need.
Yeah.
And I'm always like, we go back to basics. I'm not worried about you meeting a certain protein goal or whatever. Like, I just want folks to be able to function as humans so that their brains can function the way that they're meant to function versus just this like fight or flight survival mode where it shuts down and only focuses on the protection piece. So,
Yeah.
yeah, we're
And I think that's
definitely.
so important for people to understand. I run an online community, and last night I did a workshop on parenting the brain. And even though I know that the large majority of women in this community have heard this a million times, there is that saying that we have to hear something like 7 times before it really lands. And I think what a lot of people don't understand is that even though you may really grasp onto this concept that of course mindset work is important, right? And managing your emotions is important. But theory alone isn't going to change it. And you cannot access the part of your brain that is going to help you to do that work, which is, of course, your prefrontal cortex, your executive center, when you are constantly living in a state of escalating stress. Because what does stress do? Ultimately, it shuts down the executive center. And so, if you are living in a place of just putting more on your plate all the time and never actually cleaning house, meaning getting stuff off your plate that doesn't belong there, you're never really going to be able to do the deeper work of health, which I believe is really that thought management, the emotional agility, the regulating your nervous system, because you're not in a place where your physiology can actually do that work. And that's a bummer because it
Mhm.
changes everything if you can get there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like once you get to that point, like a switch flips, really. But the work to get there is not always easy either.
Oh, definitely. I always say it's always the things I teach are so simple and so unsexy, but they're definitely not easy, right? Simple is not necessarily easy. And especially, I think, for a lot of high achievers, because they've spent their whole life proving how much they can do. And so a lot of my clientele, very high achievers, business owners, and people who've really kind of climbed the ladder of their career. And that's well and good, but man, their unnecessary stress is not knowing how to be quiet, not knowing how to be still, not knowing how to pollinate play and curiosity into their life because they have no time for it. And so to me, that's a nutrient deficiency. Like that's a great place for us to focus our work. I always say the things that you resist the most are probably the things that are going to change you the most. So with people who can't sit still, let's take a look at that. Why is that uncomfortable for you? And the only reason it's uncomfortable for you is because you don't have a practice of doing it. And there's lots of reasons why. And, sometimes you need to understand those reasons and sometimes you don't. But it's really just a practice. And so, what are the things that you're always doing in your day? And if you aren't feeling fulfilled, what might be the opposite of that? And why aren't you doing that work?
Well, as I was reading your book too, there was one line that really jumped out at me pretty much immediately. And I'm going to read it because I want to get it
Sure.
right. So I started to see more and more clearly that it wasn't so much the weight of the body that influenced the health of a human as it was the weight of their life. And I was like, whoop. And I even, just as I read that, got little goosebumps. But I think a lot of our listeners can also recognize themselves in that line. So I'd love for you to just kind of walk us through that realization and what shift that really made for you.
Yeah. So there was about a decade of my career where I was very, very heavily in the trenches of fat loss. Helped a lot of people around the world lose a lot of weight, was very successful at it. And also arrived in this place in my career where I was like, okay, hang on a second. These people are spending 12 to 18 months doing a lot of work to change their physiology, to reshape their bodies, all the things. And then they're going back down the slippery slope to where they started. What the heck's that about? Right? And also, when you work with someone for a year, 18 months, 2 years, you get to know them pretty darn well. Right. And so I was hearing a lot of um, struggles that people were facing that had nothing to do with their physiology. Right. So their stress bucket was very full, but exercise and diet conversations alone were never going to touch those kinds of stressors. And so it was kind of that two-part realization, recognizing that, okay, obviously I'm missing some tools as a coach because my clients aren't able to sustain their results. Those missing things are the things I just talked about. I never talked about the nervous system. I didn't have any tools for parenting the brain or expanding emotional capacity. So that was a problem. But the other thing is I was feeding this belief in my clients that their body was the problem. They were using their body as the scapegoat because the real problems of their life felt so hard, so challenging, so scary, so insurmountable that it's so much easier to hyper focus. If I just lose those last 5 or 10 pounds, if I just lose 30 pounds, my relationship with my husband will be better. I'll like my career more. Now, I'm not saying that when you physically feel better, you do tend to do life better. That is absolutely true. But we can't ignore that health is very multidimensional. So in the wellness culture, they love to focus on, I say they because I kind of feel outside of it sometimes, but we love to focus in the wellness culture on health being a very physical pursuit. It's about how you look, it's about the data that you get from your doctor's office, it's about your athletic ability, right? It's very much about physicality. But that is not true because so much affects your physicality. So, health is way more than physical. Health is mental, emotional, relational. So, you're in relationship with everything in the world around you. What is the quality of those relationships? It's also environmental. We're influenced by our environment, and we're also influenced by our sense of purpose. So, if we aren't talking about all those dimensions of health, are we really creating deep health for a client? Of course not. But that is what I was doing before. I was kind of focusing on this superficial health conversation, it's all about physiology. It's all about your
Mhm.
physicality. But when I really started to understand how stress influences your physiology and all the things that were actually stressing my clients out, I started to see it as obviously so much bigger, and that I was kind of um, I was selling them almost a false bill of goods because I was only selling them this tiny, tiny piece of the conversation, mainly because I just was uneducated and I just didn't understand it well enough to do that work. Thus, here we are, like 15 years later, where I'm having very different conversations. And here's the thing I want listeners to hear. It may be true that you would be healthier if you lost weight, right? Like weight loss is not itself a terrible pursuit, but the reasons for pursuing it are everything. Do you think you're going to be more lovable? Is it because you want to dive into something that will help you to avoid all these other problems in your life? Like, what is the weight loss really about for you? And can you parent yourself in a way to go about it so you can sustain it? Because nobody wants to keep losing the same amount of weight over and over again the rest of their life. That sucks. So, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with that.
Yeah. I like the like getting to the root of like what's the motive behind it.
Yeah.
Because you're right, like you can keep pursuing this superficial goal. And I say superficial because if you haven't identified, right, what the root cause is, then it's maybe not superficial, arbitrary goal, essentially.
Yeah.
And then you pursue it, you get to that point, and if it doesn't actually address what the root cause or system level thing that you were trying to address, then yeah, you're either going to revert back to old habits or whatever, or the goalpost just keeps moving, right? And so
100%.
you never get to where you need to go.
Yeah. And you understand that like your behavior is always going to be congruent with your self-image. And
Right.
so I was never doing self-image work, right? I wasn't working on the core beliefs my clients had about themselves or their lives or their possibility. And ultimately, that was a flaw in my coaching because what I now understand on so many years on the other side of this career is that yeah, the way that you see yourself, talk about yourself, the way that you believe in yourself or not is going to influence every decision that you make about food, about exercise, about stress. Um, and so I do now, of course, a huge tenet of my work is doing a lot of self image work with my clients. Like, what is your most vibrant, fully expressed self? What would she look like? Right? What would she feel like? How would she move through her day? Because that version of you already exists. It's just that she's kind of being suffocated by another version that you also have, which is yes, I know she's in there, but this part of me, I call her the mean girl, tends to dominate. Right. And when the mean girl's dominating, we're showing up with a lot of integrity pain because our actions are not at all in alignment with that really exquisite, fully expressed self. And so that's where I want to get clients to, at least tapping into that and seeing that and aspiring to that because they show up really different when they're connected with that version of themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I do very similar work with talking about like convictions and like where how those drive the choices that you're making and often the capacity that you have, but also just being aware of where do these stem from? Like understanding, is it part of your upbringing? Is it, past workplace trauma that you're bringing
Yeah.
along with you? Is it just a part of your kind of personality traits and those kind of things to be able to identify them, not to qualify those convictions as good or bad, but more as that awareness piece and understanding so that way we can interpret decisions and choices that you've made in the past and are making now with that lens in mind. And I think that that's sounds like what you're doing. It also, in your consistency code, right? That first practice of work is awareness, but then from there you move into organization and follow through and then, ultimately realignment. And I want to dig into that some because I really enjoyed just your thought process on that and like how those practices, phases, whatever you want to call them, align and fit together. So can you kind of give us quick overview how these kind of work together, And specifically, we've talked about alignment a lot, and I'd love for you to highlight like why realignment is really that most important piece that people are missing.
Yeah. Um, so the consistency code is, first of all, I'll tell you where it came from because I think it's kind of an interesting story. It was probably about 12 years ago. My whole business had moved into the online space. I'd been brick and mortar prior to that. And obviously, and you know this, like when you move into online space, it's just like moving to a foreign country. Like nothing made sense. I didn't know what I was doing. I knew I was good at my craft, but I wasn't so good at the business side and the tech side. So of course, I had to hire coaches and people who could help me. And I was working with a business coach at the time, and I was really expressing to her my frustration with all of these sales strategists and people who were trying to help me with my business were also encouraging me to really target the very thing I was trying to get away from. They wanted me to talk about weight loss because it sells, because it's sexy, because it can draw people in. They wanted me to post more things of me working out because that's what got a lot of traction, but I didn't want to sell my physiology. I didn't want to sell what I do and making someone believe that that's what would work for them. So I was very much like against what was happening, but I didn't know how to package it in a way that would sell. So my coach said to me, okay, Courtney, if you could only teach a woman 4 things about health and wellness, what would you want her to know? And so I went away for the weekend and I really kind of just processed, okay, what am I constantly teaching? What are the 4 buckets of practices that I'm always getting into with my clients? And that's where the consistency code came from. So the 4 buckets are the practice of awareness, the practice of organization, the practice of follow through, and the practice of realignment. Now, awareness, it's again simple, sounds simple. All I have to do is be aware. But man, the things that we have to be aware of that are really going to change us in a profound way that's not a feel good exercise. And so there's a lot of reasons we avoid that work. And awareness, of course, could be what is your self image right now? We do that work versus where do you want it to be? But it's also, I think, more granular than that. It is how are you showing up in your day? Like, where are you spending your time? What are the quality of your thoughts? How do you conduct yourself as a human? And when we start doing that exposure work, because that's really what it is, it's exposing the truth of our lives, we look around and we're like, dang it, like, I don't really like that. Like, this feels crappy because it's out of alignment with how I want to be showing up. But it's kind of like, I always use the analogy of my kid. He's 16 now, but we're still dealing with the same challenges that sometimes I go in his room, right? And it can be really messy. And he'll quickly like shove things under the bed or in the closet, in the drawers, but he's not really cleaning. He's just hiding, right? And so I think that we tend to do that a lot as humans. We just shove things under the rug. We just tell ourselves we'll address it down the road, but 10, 20, 30 years go by and we've never addressed the mess. And then of course that creates bigger problems. So awareness is really that exposure work, asking yourself some really great questions. And my book is full of really great questions. At the end of every chapter, I give the reader a lot of great questions to ask herself. But with that awareness, of course, isn't going to change your life. It's what you do with the awareness.
Right.
Now, what happens a lot with awareness is it's overwhelming because when we start peeling back all of the integrity pain of our life, we kind of see it everywhere, right? We see lots of opportunity to get ourselves out of integrity pain, but we can't do all that work at once. It's kind of like your house being a disaster and expecting yourself to just snap your fingers like Mary Poppins and have it all cleaned up in an instant. That would be lovely. Who would not want that
Wouldn't it though?
power? But that's not how it rolls, right? That's not how it works. We have to decide where we're going to start. What room are you going to start in? Is it going to be with exercise? Is it going to be with your career? Is it going to be with your relationship? What room do you want to start deloading some stress in? Now, it's not even just the room, but we also have to decide where in the room. If I'm going to start with my kitchen, again, I got to pick a place to start. Maybe it's the kitchen sink. Maybe it's picking things up off the kitchen table. And so if you want to start deloading some stress in relationships, what relationship? How might we do that? And I specifically say this because a lot of clients will say to me, well, I don't know. That's why I hired you. Right? I don't know. I don't know how to deload stress. And I always have the same response. I am not co-signing on that belief. That is a hiding habit. You do know. you do know at least one, probably 10 little things that you could do to move the needle in this area. And saying that you don't know is a very convenient way to just not do anything, right? So I poke and I prod, and I really want my client to start accessing her own knowing, because that's a big part of the work that I do, is getting clients to insource, not just outsource.
Yeah.
So once she starts insourcing and we've kind of considered some possible starting places to deload some stress, we just pick a place. And here's the thing. There's no right place. There's no perfect place. It's just picking something. Because if you think of your stress load like it's in a bucket and your stress load is really heavy, you've got a lot in your bucket, it doesn't matter what you remove from the bucket. It matters that you start removing from the bucket. That's it. So
Mhm.
I think that's a very refreshing truth for my clients, because they have always been sold this idea, well, I have to start with diet and exercise. And oh my gosh, we've been beating that drum for so long. And look at the state of human health. Like, come on, right? No, we don't have to start with diet and exercise. We could start with anything that makes you feel a little bit lighter, or we could start with something that puts more life into your life, right? Because I think, and you probably talk
Mhm.
about this a lot with burnout. Burnout doesn't just come from doing too much, it comes from not doing enough of the things that actually bring us alive, right? So we could start with either one of those choices. So we start organizing them around this one thing they've chosen to focus on. Then, this is where I do the majority of my coaching, the practice of follow through. Because you can have the best intentions in the world. You can have the beautiful planner and the color coded markers and the sticky notes that go with that plan. But if you don't follow through with the promises you make to yourself, number one, nothing changes. But number two, you just continue to erode your own self trust. So the practice of follow through is really everything. How do we follow through on the promises we've made to ourselves? And that really boils down to a lot of things, but I would say two of the primary things are the way that you're talking to yourself about the work. Are you talking yourself into it or out of it? Which most people, I would argue, are talking themselves out of it. And do you have the capacity to feel hard things? Because if you don't, you will never change, because change is hard. Change is uncomfortable. Change is frustrating. Change is sometimes disappointing. And if you cannot be in the arena with those emotions, you're going to retreat back to your little comfy corner of staying exactly as you are. And so we start expanding emotional capacity. We start expanding. I give my clients a lot of tools to start parenting their brains. And then inevitably, what happens, you probably see this in your own clients. They're doing really well for a while. They're making progress. They're celebrating wins. It's all beautiful and glorious. And then something happens, right? Like, I call them the curveballs. They get sick. They lose their job. They have to have a surgery. Their kid is having trouble in school. Like, oh my gosh, like, life loves to present challenges. So there is
Yes.
a shortage of opportunities to experience curveballs. And sometimes you'll get 10 curveballs in a day. You have the best laid plans, and all you get are curveballs. So I think that one of the ultimate skills someone needs to learn in order to improve health is, how quickly can you realign? Because people who are successful in life, it is so not true that they don't get misaligned. Of course they do, but they are much quicker at getting realigned. They refuse to stay misaligned for weeks, months, or years. The analogy that I love for this is a campfire. I live in Montana, so we do lots of campfires.
Mhm.
But building a campfire is a lot of work, right? And so is behavior change. With a campfire, you've got to go collect the wood. You've got to build the ring so the fire doesn't get out of the ring. You've got to have the right wind conditions. You got to make sure the wood is dry. On and on it goes. You put all that effort into building a fire. And once it's lit and raging, when you start to see the flame go down, what do? All you have to do is chuck in a log. That's it. So easy, right? And the same is true of behavior change. If you catch your misalignments quicker, it's easy to realign, because we build what I call anchors, anchor habits that help us to pivot back really quickly. And so, maybe you didn't sleep well last night, you skipped your workout, and you ate like a jerk today. Okay, so what now what? That's always the phrase that I use. So what now what? So the next day, we're going to obviously make sure that we put you to bed at a reasonable time, and we kind of set up the conditions to help you get a good night's sleep. And we're just going to pivot back to the things that we know work for us. rather than writing this Oscar-winning script about what a horrible person you are, how you'll never get healthy, and just makes you want to hide under the covers and eat a bag of chips, right?
Mhm.
So misalignment is a certainty. Realignment is not. And so what happens when we're in a space of misalignment? Well, we just circle back to the start of the consistency code, which is the practice of awareness. What's going on here? What do I need help? Where do I need help? Where do I need to adjust my expectations? Do I need to ask for help? Do I need to get something off my plate? Right? And just so the consistency code is a circle because the work is never done as long as you have breath in your lungs. It is a
Mhm.
forever task. It is forever a forever framework that no matter like what diet dogma you buy into or what exercise programs you do, this framework will always be relevant because it's not about the minutia. It is about the self leadership skills that nobody really ever taught us. We've always been taught, you said this beautifully earlier, we tend to focus on the what, right? What am I eating? What am I doing for exercise? What time should I go to bed? Like that's the information we love hearing. But the depth of health and the real work of health is really about the why. Why are you going to bed late? Is it because your best friend flew into town you haven't seen in 10 years? That's an awesome reason. But if you're going to bed late because you're watching your 10th episode of your favorite Netflix show for the, 20th night in a row, you might not like your reason. That's probably going to cause some integrity pain. So it's not the what, it's the why. And the question my clients probably roll their eyes when they hear me say this because I ask it so much, but they'll present, whatever the rumble is, the thing that they're struggling with. And I'll say, "Do you like your reasons?" Because I'm not going to judge you. I don't know. Like, did you eat a salad for lunch because you really were craving vegetables and it's just what looked really awesome and felt like it was going to really serve your body? Or did you eat a salad for lunch because you think you're a worthless human unless you lose 20 pounds? Like, let's just get into the why,
Mhm.
and keep poking at questions like that. People are like, oh, I didn't have to eat a salad for lunch. I could have made a different, a healthy choice that maybe aligned with where I truly was. And no, I didn't like my reasons. So what would I do differently in the future? Right. And
Mhm.
it's unsexy, it's slow, but man, it's just profound. Like when people really start asking themselves the right questions and they have the right skills to navigate life. Because life,
Mhm.
sadly, I know we all wish it was a once in a lifetime transformation because that's what we chase. Like, just give me the once in a lifetime transformation. And I always tell my clients, no, I will give you a box of skill sets that will help you to navigate a life of transformation. But that's what life is. It is ongoing transformation. You're always adjusting and recalibrating. And so, what tools do you have to do that with grace and ease? And I have found that a lot of women have none. So
Mhm.
that's why I'm so passionate about what I teach is just to help give them those skills that we never learned along our lifeline.
Mhm. Yeah. I love the organization piece, specifically as it ties to that follow through because whenever I'm working with folks, we'll come up with strategies and like you said, like I call it like let's put tools in your tool belt so you know what to
Yeah,
pick and choose when you need to.
yeah,
Um, but whenever we start that work, it's always planning for the perfect situation. They're like the ideal situation if everything, context wise was working and I had all the energy in the world, this is my tool. I'm like, that's not going to work. We need to plan for actually when you're at rock bottom, because if you can execute at rock bottom,
yes,
then you can excel when the conditions are prime. So we actually need to think about and dig into, like you were saying, the awareness piece of the not so sexy, ugly work
yeah,
of like what is your rock bottom and how do we plan for something that'll work then, because if
yeah,
you can climb out of that with those tools you'll gain more confidence, you'll add more tools to your tool belt that you can ideally at some point get to that prime situation, understanding that that is not a consistent permanent state, that it will fluctuate and change
yeah,
as you
absolutely.
go.
There's a quote, I don't know who said it, but I use it all the time because I think it's so brilliant. And it says that life is one long series of problem solving. And the sooner
Oh
you
yeah.
accept that truth, the less you will suffer. Because how many people are they're leaning into work to change their life, thinking if I just do this, I'll arrive in this utopia of rainbows and unicorns where I will never have to do this work again. Sister, that place is not coming. Like, right? That's just not the way life rolls. You know that on a fundamental level. But let's just like call it for what it is. Like, life is going to always present you with challenges and problems forevermore. How you show up within those problems and challenges is really everything. And to your point about rock bottom, two things that may be useful to the listener that just kind of sparked when you were talking is that I always challenge a client because at the end of a call, I always ask her what's she committing to between now and the next time we talk. Like, what is the work you're leaning into? What is the work you're choosing? And of course, often what they say is way too ambitious, right? It's just too big. And so I'll say, okay, tell me the bare minimum that you're committing to around this thing. Give me the bare minimum. And, she kind of looks at me like, but I'm capable of so much more. And I'm like, I know you are. Like, you're a smart, capable cookie, but let's just give you bare minimum. So if you do more, it just feels like an extra win. Like, oh my God, look at me. I said I was going to work out for 20 minutes and I did 30, or I did an hour. That's great. And the other thing is when a client commits to something, whatever it is, I'm going to have this, challenging conversation I've been avoiding with my husband. Amazing. When are you going to do it? They tell me all, how they're going to approach it, all the things. And at the end, I will say, now tell me why you're not going to do it. Because so often we don't consider why we're not going to do it. But if we can consider what might the obstacles be, then I can premeditate the solutions. If I find myself resisting or feeling like, oh, now's not a good time, what would I do in that situation? And lo and behold, you have answers. And so I think that's really important work. It's not just about committing. Is the commitment within your window of tolerance, right? Within your capacity, and expect that you're not going to want to follow through because you've been not following through for how long? I mean, that's why you hired me.
That's your MO.
Right. Yeah. So I think those two things can really make a big difference for people.
Yeah. Yeah. I talk a lot about minimum viable changes. Like I do a design thinking approach in my coaching. So every time I'm like, okay, what are some experiments that we can try, but very minimally, like we got to break these down into the bare minimum, like you said. And I love that too. I see this very helpful with my clients, and I'm sure with yours, is when you do create that minimum change. And like you said, if you go above and beyond that, that keeps the momentum going. Whereas if you have this bigger goal that inevitably will be harder to reach for whatever reason because of the obstacles that will come your way, then it's easy to continue to repeat the cycle of not doing anything, not taking any action. A lot of learned helplessness kind of comes from this piece. So if you can have that small piece to get the momentum, I always say, like, let's take messy action. I don't care if it's perfect. I just want you to move in a direction. I want you to choose a direction and move it towards that direction. You can always change your mind.
Yeah.
But we need to make some progress towards that because you're stuck in what you're currently at, and that's not serving you in any way, shape, or form either.
Yeah. You'll learn or you'll grow, right? When you make a commitment to something, you'll learn or you'll grow. But if you never commit or you never choose a direction, you can't do either one of those things. You can't learn and you can't grow. So even if you move in the opposite direction of where you intended to go, that's intel. You've learned something.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really
everything's data.
Everything's data. It is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Courtney, this has been great, but I want to be cognizant of time, and I want to get to my last question. And that is that this podcast, as you know, is all about balanced living with badass results. And I love to ask all of my guests this question. How do you define being a balanced badass in your own life?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say for me, of course, it's going to come back to grace and grit. The reason I named my company Grace and Grit is because I have seen women use grace to the point of stagnation. So they use grace to coat over excuses, right? So they use the term grace to rationalize not doing the work. And then I have seen women use grit to the point of self-destruction, right? Like this is what leads to burnout and, a lot of problems. And so to me, that balanced badass is the sweet spot somewhere in the center. We need both. We need grace. We need to be kind to ourselves, befriend ourselves, be curious about ourselves, date ourselves. But we also are being called into work to improve ourselves, right? There's the quote, I don't know I think it was Sophia Bush, who said, you can be a masterpiece and a work in progress simultaneously. And to me, that's what grace and grit is. Grace is you are a masterpiece. You are worthy. You are amazing. You are such a gift to this world. And there's some work that you could do to make your time here more impactful for you and for the people around you. And so, what is that work? There's no shame in it because you know what? We've all been assigned it. We all have different curriculum, but we've all been assigned the work of leaning into developing parts of ourselves that have been a little malnourished or were just never really developed. And so, that's a very human thing. And yeah, so that's what I would say is the sweet spot is somewhere in the center of grace and grit. To me, that's what a balanced badass is.
Yeah. Love that. Well, as we wrap up, I am just so thankful for you sharing your expertise with us, for you coming on the show. I know that my listeners probably got tons of good information. I did for sure. And my guess is that folks are going to want to stay connected with you. So, how can folks follow your work, connect with you outside of this episode?
Yeah, the best place is really my website, graceandgrit.com. You can find all the things and resources that I offer there. They can find the podcast, they can find the book, like all the things, all the goodness is on that site.
Awesome. Well, I will be sure to link that in the show notes as well. And once again, thank you so much, Courtney. I really appreciate you
Oh,
being
thank
here.
you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And for folks listening, you know the drill. If you got something from this episode, we would love it if you would share it with a friend, share it on social media, do whatever you need to do, like, follow, all that jazz. But otherwise, I just hope that you will take care of yourself this week and make good choices, friend. We'll see you next time.